Hello, this is Paul Glumaz with General Welfare Presents. Today is the 15th of August, and today is the day back in 1971 when Nixon pulled the plug on the dollar and took the dollar off the gold reserve system. And that's when the financial parasites began taking over the world. And now their parasitical actions have created the crisis that we are now in. So, however, that's not what I'm going to talk about in this episode. I'm going to talk about something very fundamental, something which will help a lot of people understand what the British Empire really is. And I'm going to look at it from a fundamental standpoint of its methods of operations. I will then briefly apply that to the current situation. Now, first is that through the educational system, through the culture, through the media, whatever kind, there are categorical systems embedded in the promotion of certain areas like philosophy, theology, social sciences, psychology, history. These embedded categorical systems are the means of trapping people into viewing the world through the categories that they are educated in. And in each of these categorical systems this reality is divided up in what appears to be, to the individual learning these categorical systems, to be plausible or appears to be coherent with what sense perception. And the problem is, once you adopt certain categorical views, you begin to organize reality into those categories. So they become part of your perception. So you're seeing things through the categories. And you're organizing your view of reality based on these categories. And they become the basis of your perception. Each categorical system is a trap defining reality, but is not reality. The manufacture of these categorical systems are usually done by people who are deployed or promoted by those higher up who know that these categorical systems do not define reality, but only appear to define reality. For those who then use these categorical systems to organize reality, they are trapped. Okay, so essentially, any categorical system is an attempt to organize reality into categories, and these categories cannot be reality, because all categorical systems, by their inherent nature, by dividing up the world, dividing up reality, are inherently flawed, are inherently false. So now, in philosophy, you have categorical systems like Aristotelian systems of how one perceives or knows a proposition, or how you define a proposition or whatever. And he has 10 categories: substance, quantity, quality, relation, somewhere, sometime, being in a position, having, acting, and being acted upon. These insights and these categories define everything that you're looking at from the standpoint of what it appears to be. And these categories do not deal with how these things come into being or what is their relationship in the causal sense with other things. And this is in Aristotle. In Plato, there are no categories. This is the difference between Aristotle and Plato. In Plato, there are no categories because ideas, or what Plato calls ideas, which are what LaRouche calls thought objects, or insights, do not conform to categories. If you have an insight into something, it can't be put in a category. Now, these insights generally occur outside of your conscious mind. They are things that pop into your conscious mind. They are outside of sense certainty, but come into your conscious mind as a kind of eruption from an unconscious or subconscious source. Plato calls that memory. What Plato means by memory are these thought objects that emerge from your unconscious or subconscious. However, if you believe in making your mind conform to the categories that you learn to organize reality, then it will be very hard for you, or harder for you, to have that kind of process occur. In other words, the creative process becomes harder because you're constrained by these categories. And if you can get the entire humanity into these categories, then you don't have to worry about creativity. Now, in the social sciences, so how does the eruption of these insights come about? It's through a process of dialogue, where you're actually examining the validity of an underlying system. In other words, through a process of dialogue. And since you are taught to perceive in these categories, everything that is presented to you is compartmentalized. That's how the media presents everything. It's in a compartmentalized form. China is separate from Russia, is separate from the US. Economics is separate from politics, is separate from, everything is separated. So when you view reality as presented to you in the media, it's already been put into these compartmentalized forms. And if you try to figure out the connection between all these things, then you might run into problems because people who aren't seeing the connections or are stuck in the categories, and they're not going to follow what you're saying. It's not going to make sense to them. Or they may call you a conspiracy, or they may call you something else. And when you operate in these categories and compartmentalization of reality, then causality is basically the interaction of these things. It's the interaction of things. It's not really understandable. It's the interaction. It's the sum of the interaction. So that's the other aspect of this. In the social sciences, a category was invented that everyone still uses today, which is the left versus the right. It's completely meaningless, but it's still used. It's socialism versus communism, capitalism versus communism, or capitalism versus socialism. In psychology, Freud invented some categories that then became used by people homosexual versus heterosexual. There were no such categories existed before that, and people did not think of themselves as homosexual or heterosexual. But once those categories became the way you classified sexual orientation, then that becomes the perception, becomes the basis of perception. In the middle of 1800s, a categorical system based on race was promoted. It was centered around Darwin and Huxley, which explained and connected race to the level of development, and which also from that developed social Darwinism. By the 1920s, this idea of survival of the fittest and station in life being determined by one's genes, and the inferiority of and the superiority of different races to each other, was accepted by almost everybody in the educated elite of Europe and the United States. Okay, today it's the inverse. It's dead white European males. It's the same thing, but it's inverted into dead white European males. Cause all the problems. Well, that was definitely the case. That these people that promoted the racist viewpoints were dead white European males. But that's another category by which people start to think. They're still thinking in race. They're thinking in race in the other category, and they're thinking in race in this category. So they're thinking in race. Okay. Another aspect of this is if you are not this, you're that. If you're not that, you're this. So that's the other side of categories. There's no in between. You're either with God or you're not with God. You're either with us or you're not with us. So all categorical systems are false, are inherently false. Non-categorical approaches to knowledge can be found in Plato, can be found in Cusa, where he takes the maximum and the minimum. And he begins with a relationship between the one and the one. It can be found in Leibniz in something called the monad, where the interaction of things is not of things, but of monads. Monads are completely indivisible. They are intelligences. They have an intention. And that's how, and the interaction of these things is different. But they're not categories. They're not categories. You can't break a monad down. Okay? And you also see this in LaRouche's economics, in the physical science of economics of LaRouche, has no categories. You have the entire economy as one, which is physically reproducing itself. And then there are relationships internally that have to change to change the rate of development of the physical economy. But there's no categories. It's not money. It's not, there's no categories in it. It's not like the invisible hand, it's nothing like that. There's no categories. There's no assumptions or categories. And so where do we stand today in terms of categorical systems used to control the politics which is breaking down? Well, you have capitalism versus socialism is the issue for those reacting to the crisis in the economy. So the people who are reacting or are tending towards trying to deal with the crisis are being told that it's the capitalists versus the communists, and the communists or the socialists are causing the problem. And who are the socialists? Well, they're the Democrats, they're AOC, they're Nancy Pelosi, and all and so forth. Okay, so in that one, the good guys are the capitalists, the bad guys are the socialists. And then, on the other hand, the AOC crowd, or the so-called socialist crowd, it's unbridled capitalism that created the problem. So the bad guys are the capitalists, and the good guys are the socialists. But they're both responding to the same problem. But the categories prevent them from understanding that the categorical systems that they're thinking in are absolutely stupid. They have nothing to do with reality. Especially when you realize that the unbridled capitalists are the ones financing the unbridled socialists, right? So it doesn't work. So in both you have contradictions. These categories have nothing to do with reality, yet people get trapped in them, even though these categories are collapsing. The other major categories are in religion, where different confessions define themselves in opposition to other confessions, and that becomes a categorical system. Or you have a dispute over the interpretation of scriptures or whatever, and then that becomes a categorical system. You're a Protestant, I'm a Catholic, or whatever. And so this is how this thing works. And the arguments are around various different things, and that's how you do it. In the sciences, you have materialism rules, and anybody who says that God is a part of the universe in a physical, scientific way is considered a nutcase. You can't bring God into science. It's not allowed. Yet you can't explain the world based on the materialist doctrines which lead to the Big Bang and entropy. You cannot explain anything that's causal from that standpoint. Yet if you depart from the materialist categorical system, that everything is basically an interaction of particles, then you are essentially no ideas, no intention is allowed in the physical universe. But then you can't explain anything that way. So it's screwed up, because people are not looking at reality from the standpoint of no categories. How does it really work? Let's see how we can tell how it really works. Let's see if we can prove that it works that way, and let's see if we can take advantage of what we learn to improve the condition of man. No. These things are incredible, oppressive. The biggest issue is dialogue. Any comprehensive dialogue and extensive dialogue, like in Plato's dialogues, threatens categorical systems. Those pointing fingers are the way you keep it in a categorical system. Or you're this, or you're that. None of the elites, however, at the highest level, believe in any of these categories. They are what you might call demigods or archons, the highest elite. They are above the polarities of categories. They created the categories for you to get trapped in, because that's an aspect of how the British Empire works. The British Empire's elite know this, and then they can profile where you are in the categorical system to manipulate you. But by subscribing to a categorical system, you essentially are manipulable and can be directed in different ways. Having said all of this, let's get to the categorical system that is controlling the relationship between nations and the threat to that system. But before I do that, I want to discuss British intelligence methods and how they work within the system of categories. British have the best system of intelligence because it operates on the basis of everything that they say, and everything that anyone says is a lie, a conscious lie in most cases. British society and intelligence is based on a system of lies. Those that get it, that realize everything is a lie, and understand that, and can manipulate that, are the ones who move up the ladder, and those that do not, don't, and those that expose it or are crushed or become social outcasts. The poorer you are, the more freedom you have to say what you say, but the less consequences you are less consequential in the society. The training of the British intelligence elites begins at around 7 years old in the elite British boarding schools, boys' schools, where the younger are sex slaves to the elder students, and all learn to keep quiet about it. Once they are in higher education, they learn the two realities. The reality that is real, meaning being boogered, and the other reality of what you have to maintain in public. The British conduct of intelligence operations is designed and based on plausible lies. One example of British intelligence is that the drug monies create a Marxist group, which then offers itself to the Soviet. This has been the time of the Soviet Union, and then once there's a connection with the Soviet Union. It then goes to the United States with this wonderful intelligence to the Soviets that we now have a threatening communist insurgency or whatever. This is the typical operation in every area, whether it's religious wars, everything. It's just, it sets up something, and then it goes to the other, and then it goes to the other, and this is how they do it. You see this in the Litvinenko affair, which Christopher Steele was involved in 2006. And you see this in the Steele dossier. You see it everywhere. It's all lies. And it's all manipulation. And you have to understand that everything is a lie. Okay? But not everybody believes in those lies. The people saying those lies don't believe it. And it's a special kind of character that the British developed that gives them the power to rule the world, because they can lie and you don't know they're lying, and their lying is tailored to your categorical perceptions. That's how it works. That is the most important thing you need to understand about how the British Empire works, is on that basis. Okay, so unless you understand that a categorical system makes you vulnerable to manipulation, and unless you decide to reject all categorical systems and go on your insight, that's the most important thing. But in our educational system, that's how you pass, that's how you get ahead, and so forth and so on. So now, in the realm of foreign affairs, the categorical systems that were developed in the modern period occurred coming out of World War II. And it went into the Cold War, but it's called geopolitics. Okay, and this was set up by the use of nuclear terror. So you had Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then you had a permanent war, permanent peace, and you divided the world into these camps, and you defined everything on that basis. So Americans, through the process of the McCarthy period and the Cold War, began to define themselves as anti-communists or pro-communists. If you didn't like the system you're in, you tended to, which happened in the student period, but those were the categories. The whole thing was a scam. And so that's how it works. And then you had the tension of nuclear war. Whenever the United States or the Soviet Union got to a point where they wanted to work together, then you had something happen. The Cuban Missile Crisis, whatever. When Kennedy moved towards ending the Cold War by getting a joint space program with the Soviets, he was assassinated. When Ronald Reagan started to go for something similar around LaRouche's Strategic Defense Initiative, he was almost assassinated and was knocked out for a long period of time. So this is how categories work. Okay? And empires are based on categories. Permanent wars are based on categories, where you control perception. So I wanted to get this across. This is very important. And this is why we're having problems right now. Okay? And only when you bust out of the categorical system can people start to make agreements with each other that are in their mutual benefit. As long as you're trapped in the case of geopolitics and those categorical systems, what have you. Like, for instance, if the role of nuclear power as a terror mechanism were to end, then countries could work together. But as soon as the countries that are supposed to be in conflict begin working together, well, then there's things happen to reinforce the categories, to reinforce us versus them. And that is the empire, folks. That is the British Empire. It's the banking and it's all of that other stuff, but this is the core of it. So I thank you very much for watching this, and we'll do more on this later.